Are very glad to have with us actually two people over the course of the time who are going to talk to us about something that's been in the news a lot, which is the Department of Education at the federal level. And I think a lot of us know that it's important, but don't necessarily know all that it does and what it means for our school districts. So we're happy, first of all, to be welcoming Rob Curtin, who may be familiar to many of you. He's the Chief Data Accountability and Achievement Officer for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And then Matt Denninger is going to join us in a bit. And you may recognize his name because it often comes on memos that mean that you have money coming to your district. So he's going to talk about federal grants. And I think with that, Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Tracy, can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. Made it through another week here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to attempt to share some slides here. And uh, Hopefully, Tracy, can you see those?
Yes, I can.
Great. All right. I am, as Tracy said, my name is Rob Curtin. I lead our data assessment and accountability work at the department. And have a this is have a long history of working with USCD. I am in year 23 at the department. I have spent a lot of time working with USCD, and happy to give you some interaction and let you know what it's like, how we work with USCD at DESE, and what they do and what they don't do, and so on. So, as Tracy said, my colleague Matt Denninger wasn't able to join right away, but he is going to finish up a meeting as soon as he can, and hopefully join us soon. But I'm going to kick us off talking about a few things. The first is I think it's important to understand the structure of the USCD and how it looks and how it works in terms of when administrations change. It really sort of defines how a lot of our interactions with the U.S. Department of Education go. Then I'm going to go over some of the things that we do with the department, and go through some of those in some detail. Um, and it's I think you're going to see a little bit of a common thread here, and that is it's not very different than how we interact with our districts, right? It's just sort of a different hierarchy, but it's a lot of the same things that we do. And then when Matt joins us, he will really give an overview around federal funding. That's in his area. And although I'm involved in it because we actually calculate a lot of the allocations, my staff do. But in terms of administering the grants, federal grants, that falls under Matt, and his shop is in charge of that. So he's going to give you an overview of federal funding and exactly, we're talking about a lot of money, and how that and how it works. And how much, it results in DESE getting a fair amount of money too, and helps to fund our department. Happy to take any questions, and hopefully we have some answers. Also happy to dispel any myths. There are things you might have heard that may or may not be true, and deal and go through there. I do want to offer a little bit of a disclaimer for this entire presentation, right? We're trying to give you a flavor of the relationship between USCD and DESE. Just about all of our offices, many of our colleagues at the department work with USCD. This is not completely exhaustive. If you want to know whether or not a certain group works with DESE or works with USCD, or USCD has any sort of authority over a particular area, I'm happy to answer that question. But this is not an exhaustive list. You'd have to have many people from the department on this call to be able to handle that. So just a little bit of a disclaimer there. So with that, why don't we jump in here? So, well, just like at at the department, I think it's important to think about the structure of USED, and how they're set up. They're a very, very large organization, right? And as you know, we are approaching an administration change. It's probably what's driving the need for this PowerPoint and the questions that a lot of people, or this presentation on this topic, and a lot of people might have questions about what happened. But I want to give you a little bit of flavor of my experience with DESE over the course, I mean, with USED over the course of, as I said, 22 going on 23 years. Administrations change, as you know, right? And we're about to approach a new one. But one of the big things that I want people to be aware of is that the majority of USED staffing does not change with the change in administration. The overwhelming majority, actually. There is a series there. The U.S. Department of Education is comprised of appointed staff and career staff. Okay. And our main DESE points of contact are not the appointed staff. Now, we may interact with them as they change, as they get appointed to some of the higher level positions. We may at times interact with the Secretary of Education, or the assistant secretaries that may be appointed. But the overwhelming majority of our interactions and our points of contact are not with the appointed staff. They're with the career staffers, and this really does help to maintain some of the continuity that exists in the relationship. I guess the main point I'm trying to get across here is it is not like, um, when the administration changes on January 20th, right? And new people, new faces start to come into USED. Yes, there could be policy changes, right? There are always policy changes in administration, but what I find reassuring and has been reassuring over my time at the department is that a lot of the people that I'm dealing with are the same. And that includes, to be really clear here, a lot of the legal staff. Okay. And that helps with continuity because their interpretations of the law aren't, generally speaking, and I'm going to always leave open room for changes here, but generally speaking, right, their interpretation of Title One, for example, right, has remained pretty consistent over the course of whatever administration that has been in charge in my dealings with them. Okay. So I think it's important. I think we hear about a change in administration and we think about what that might mean. Now, there's an added little wrinkle here. We've heard about perhaps the elimination of the Department of Education. I can offer an opinion on that in a bit, but I think it's really important to know that there is a degree of stability that happens here. And no matter what you might hear about who's coming in or not, the overwhelming majority of folks will remain the same. So just want to start there. That may be known to everybody, but I just want to make sure that people had a really clear understanding of what's happening sort of staffing wise at the U.S. Department of Education, or at least has happened previously with the changes of administrations that I've seen over my time at DESE. All right, let's go through, as I mentioned on the agenda slide, let's just go through a series of what our interactions with USED look like. Okay. So I've labeled out a series of interactions here. I'm involved in a lot of them, as not only in my role that in the staff that I oversee, but also as part of the commissioner's cabinet. We have a series of interactions with USED, and I want to go through some of them with you here. And again, this is not unlike what happens with our districts in terms of DESE, but first, we provide them with a tremendous amount of information. Okay. We have staff that their job is basically to make sure that we're providing all of the required information to USED that they require. And that's just like we require a tremendous amount of information from districts. Okay. We submit a incredible amount of volume, incredible amount of data to them on an annual basis. This is through a system called EDFACS. Um, and we provide over 100 different data files with them. So we tell them about how many kids we have in our state, how many kids in various student groups, whether that be racial, ethnic, whether that be students with disabilities, low income, English learners, migrant, homeless, right? We provide them with a lot of aggregate data at the state, district, and school levels. So all of those 100 data files, we have to do it basically at 3 levels. So it turns into a lot of data that we have to submit to them. I mentioned enrollment. We also provide them with data on our outcomes. Okay, so how are our students doing on our assessment? How are our students doing on our English language proficiency assessment? Graduation rates, dropout rates, suspension data, right? A tremendous amount of information that we collect um, from all of you or that we administer through our assessment, we provide to the USED and it's required of us in exchange for the federal dollars that we get. We also let the U.S. Department of Education know about our accountability designations. As you know, Title I requires that we place federal designations on some schools, some of our lowest performing schools, whether that be in the aggregate or with specific student groups. We have to tell the U.S. Department of Education who those schools are. And we'll get into in a little bit what we're doing with them. We also have to tell them that. We also provide them a bunch of financial data in terms of where is the federal dollars that they've given us, where is that going? So we tell them the allocation amounts, which districts are getting how much money. It's just all of this is an information exchange as part of receiving federal dollars. I want to say something really clearly because this is a myth I've heard. And I want to dispel this as strongly as I can. We do not share individual information on students or adults with the U.S. Department of Education. Okay? We do not share names. We do not share student information on whether they're in a student, any students in a certain student group, whether or not they're homeless, whether or not any sort of documentation status, any sort of sexual orientation, anything of that nature. A couple of those we don't even collect, by the way, nor do we want to collect. But we do not share any personally identifiable data with the U.S. Department of Education. Okay. I think it's really important to say that because that's one of the myths that I have heard. Monitoring, that's another one, how the U.S. interacts with us. And again, not unlike what we do with districts. Periodically, we are monitored in exchange for a tremendous amount of federal dollars. So I want to and Tracy, I just got a note from Matt. He's here. If you could promote him, that'd be great. Um, on the monitoring front, right? So just like we monitor districts and how they're doing with the dollars that we're providing to them, we're monitored based upon the dollars that are provided to us. So all of our programmatics, our major federal programs, and Matt can perhaps speak some more about this. I'm involved in a lot of them because my offices interact with a lot of them also, but all of our major programs are monitored, whether that be special education or English learner programs, the title programs, right? We are on a monitoring cycle. Or sometimes there are just periodic monitoring activities that happen, but our work at the department in exchange for federal dollars is monitored. And that monitoring looks a lot like we do, where USED, they used to come to Malden. They don't come to Everett as much. It's mostly done over virtually. But we have to provide documents. We have to provide information. We have to provide proof of the things that we're doing and we're doing in accordance with federal law and regulation. There's fiscal monitoring. Are our systems in place to monitor our federal spending? That monitoring is done by them as well. They do a lot of data monitoring. Okay, they come in. In federal law, there's a lot of places that says that X amount of data needs to this or X or Y data needs to be publicly available. Okay. So we have to provide evidence that shows that the data that we're supposed to make publicly available is being collected. We have to first show that, and we have to show that we are making it publicly available. What comes to mind here are our report cards, okay, that we put out about all of our districts and schools. We, fairly recently went through a district and school report card monitoring where the statute lays out in pretty good detail what has to be made publicly available, and they check to make sure whether it's being made publicly available. Okay. Um,
Rob, can I pipe in on the
yeah,
first federal funding thing?
sure.
First of all, hey everybody, Matt Denninger, I'm the Chief Strategy and Research Officer. Thanks for having me today. As we get into this topic that is, you know, extremely timely. There's going to be a lot of focus on federal funds that are going forward. But yeah, just wanted to say not only does USED require DESE to do monitoring of districts on a regular cycle. Usually we have like a 6-year cycle for things like IDEA, things like Title I, all the ESSA programs. So they make us do monitoring. But then when they monitor us as DESE, they will often also pick out a few districts
Oh yeah. Yeah.
just as like part of their sample to, sort of get the full picture. So they're not just asking DESE questions, they're asking DESE questions and they're asking a couple of districts questions about how DESE is running these programs. So, districts are involved in both of those kinds of processes.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So it's a good point. They're basically making sure that we're doing our job, just like when we are monitoring districts, we're making sure that districts are following the rules and regulations that we've set out. Whoops. Um, there is just like the state, it's really analogous as I started thinking about this, right? There are federal law and regulations, and they have a lot of requirements in there. And all of those federal laws and requirement and regulations are fair game for compliance monitoring on the part of the USED. And Matt will talk a little bit about the type of dollars that we're talking about here. But generally speaking, right, anything that's in those federal laws and regulations are fair game, just like they are for us in terms of state laws and state regulations. Um, And the other thing is around program approval, and this is a big one, right? That we could talk about for a long time. But generally speaking, we have a lot of different offices at the department that receive federal dollars, okay? And to do their work. And those offices that receive federal dollars are often required, if not always required, to submit plans about how they're going to use those federal dollars and how they're going to use and how we're going to do our work. Okay. So whether that be, we have a large consolidated state performance plan, right? That is around Title One, whether that be Title III, right? A lot of different offices, a rep for English learners, students with disabilities are under or a lot of us are under requirements to submit plans to the department. And those plans are often approved or not approved or asked to be amended and so on and so forth. So I'd say this is, as far as DESE employees go, like a lot of our main interaction with them is making sure that we are getting the approvals necessary to do the work that we want to do. So I want to give you an example here of two that, for my work example, right? Just to give you an idea of some of the things that people might not realize require USED approval. Okay. And the first is MCAS. Okay. A lot of people don't realize, first of all, a lot of people don't realize that, how MCAS is constructed and how it's developed and the role that educators play in developing the assessment. But many, many people don't realize that USED approves our assessment. Okay. We go through a federal peer review process in which USED is involved that looks at our assessment, and our assessment has to meet certain standards. Okay. We cannot offer our assessments in compliance with Title I as required by Title I unless they are approved by USED. Okay. Likewise, we have a district and school accountability system that comes out of my shop. That district and school accountability system, okay, certain aspects of it are required to be approved by the U.S. Department of Education, and that turns into a negotiation, basically. We have an idea of how we want to run the system, and that system is certain aspects of it are required to be approved by the USED. So, on a roughly every 2 or 3 year basis, we have to have that conversation with them about what our accountability system looks like, how it's running, and we have to receive approval in order to receive the federal dollars that we get. And this applies to, and Matt can certainly speak more about this, but this applies to many, many offices at the department. And this all comes back to, basically, this stuff's all in exchange for federal dollars. Okay. So Matt, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk a little bit about the federal dollars that we're receiving, and also some of the plan approval work that your staff does.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
You want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, I'll see if I can share here. I did set up a few slides. Let's see here. All right, I think I may be in sorter mode, but that'll have to do. Hopefully you can all see this. All right. So wanted to give you, just a bird's eye view of the federal grants and what they're all about, and some of the main themes. First of all, as you probably all know, that education is not in the Constitution. So the way the federal government works is that they give us money, as Rob has sort of said, in exchange for compliance with that money. And so as we are recipients of that money, so too do we have to follow the rules that go along with taking that money. Overall, federal grants don't actually make up a ton of Massachusetts education spending sort of writ large. So they're actually getting quite, on the whole, a bit of bang for their buck, right? They don't give a lot of what it takes to educate all students in the Commonwealth, Massachusetts, but it's certainly enough that we there's no way that we're going to not take the federal funds. Furthermore, that 5%, that's an average. There's a wide variation, actually, because it really depends on what district you're in. Federal funding is often weighted toward those districts that are larger and have more low-income students in their population. So, certain districts might get around the average of 5% of their budgets for federal funding. Certain districts might get, 1%, 2%, and certain districts might get, 10, 15, maybe even 20% of their funding from federal sources. It really depends, because our Chapter 70 system, is equitably arranged so that districts that are wealthier have to inject more local dollars than state dollars. The federal funding system is similar in that respect. So that proportion is going to vary. It's also worth noting that, USED runs probably over 100 grant programs. K-12 is not their only game in town. They have quite a lot to do with higher education, and public higher education. They do a lot with civil rights. They do, the FAFSA, all kinds of programming. They have an Institute of Education Sciences that looks at, funding research. They have a data team as well. So they have a wide array of departments, and I can get into some of those if you're interested. They also have their own inspector general, because of the amount of money that does audits and investigations into claims of fraud. And you know those offices usually pay for themselves because they find they find fraud with these dollars. There are a few instances in COVID that I could get into, but overall, USCD runs hundreds of grant programs, probably over 100 grant programs, but the largest and most regular that we're used to are really stem from three laws. You have the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, that gets reauthorized every 10 years or so. And that gives us Title I dollars, which is probably the second largest federal grant we get. Title II-A dollars, Title III dollars. Title II-A is for educators, and usually professional development, class size reduction. Title III is for English learners, and Title IV is for more like holistic student supports, etc. IDEA, that is, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that is the largest federal grant that we get on a regular basis. And that comes in two flavors, one, the K-12 version, and we also have a pre-K special education grant that goes out to most districts, but not all districts. And then Perkins for vocational programming within non-Chapter 74, basically federal programming for career tech programs. I'm gonna stop sharing this because I wanted to share with you just what federal funding sort of looks like. Uh, Let me see here. So yeah, this is what I wanted to share. So this is what like the education budget looks like, and has looked like over the past 6 years. And as you can see, there's a red sort of maroon-ish line here that is like the regular budget that US Ed either works with or distributes out to all the states and schools and districts. And here's what happened in COVID. Right? You have basically the CARES Act, which made this go up a bit. This is regular plus the supplemental. And then in quick succession, the SURSA Act came out, and then the American Rescue Plan came out, and Ed's budget went all the way up to 300 plus $billion, and then back down again. So we are back down to normal levels now, being in fiscal year 25. But I thought that was sort of an amusing graphic to see what kind of impact the COVID relief dollars had. It more than tripled what their regular allotment of funds and allocation of funds out to states was. More than tripled, right? We're here around 75, 80 billion, and this goes all the way up to 320 billion, 325 or so. All right, so back to my PowerPoint. So Another thing to just keep in mind with these federal grants, money for these grants doesn't just, I mean, it's unfortunate, but it doesn't just magically appear every year. Um, Money for these grants must be appropriated by Congress every single year. So typically these are forward funded, right? Congress gets together and they set appropriations for, it's usually 12 bills um, that they have to put forward that basically fund the federal government and all these different aspects of the federal government, and education being one of them. Um, and they set this in advance so that when you start the school year in, well, let's call it July 1st, because that's the beginning of our fiscal year, so that you know how much in terms of federal funding you are going to get at that point. Um, Unfortunately, we are now in a situation where the federal government is only funded through March 14th, and so they haven't forward funded beyond March 14th. We actually don't know what the appropriations are going to be. The new presidential administration and the new Congress is going to have to grapple with that. So we're in a little bit of a holding pattern, and it's a little bit later than normal. Usually we know by now about more or less what we're going to be getting as a state for these federal funds. We don't know that now. We just don't. That's going to take a little while. So, we will be, as my federal grants office, we have a newsletter. We're in regular contact with all of the districts and their fiscal leads and their grant leads to make sure that they're apprised of the workings in Washington when it comes to important things like, so, bottom line, how much are we going to get? Um, as I said, they make up about 5%. Um, a couple of things that, characteristics that these grants have that is also important to know is that they're almost without exception meant to be supplemental to state and local dollars. So they have this, as you may have heard, supplement, not supplant provisions, which, basically is a way of saying, look, we're giving you federal funds so that you can improve your programming beyond what your normal program is. We're not giving you this money so that you can say, hooray, we got local dollars or we got federal dollars. Let's cut out local funds and do something else with them, or lower tax or whatever. It's not meant to fill in anything. It is meant to be supplemental. So um, you know oftentimes these funds come out, districts don't even know their exact totals or what they get until probably late June, July, right? They come out um, after your local budgets are set, and certainly after what you're getting for Chapter 70 state funds. So that's another reason why these funds come out late, and that's a bit of a nuisance. But the federal government's perspective is, look, these are additional. These are extra. You want to have some certainty, but you actually don't have full certainty with how much you're going to get for federal dollars each year. Now, we're talking about IDEA, and all those ESSA grants and all the Perkins grants. Also, almost without exception, there's another safeguard here, and that they require districts to maintain effort from one year to the next with respect to the state and local dollars that they're spending. So this is similar in Massachusetts to, the net school spending requirements, where you have to maintain, basically, as a locality, as a municipality, or as an LEA, you have to maintain a certain level of your own local funding to get these funds. So it's interesting because and there's a different flavor of maintenance of effort for each of the federal laws. So for ESSA, it's actually easy to hit. ESSA, it's they say 90% of what you did last year. Um, in state and local dollars. And that's, in Massachusetts, that's easy to hit because of our Chapter 70 formula. IDEA is a little bit different. IDEA really looks at special education expenditures, and we look at it at the beginning of this year and at the end of the year to make sure that you're not spending less on special education services. So that is a particularly rigorous standard that comes along with IDEA funds. So those were like my general overview slides of um, of federal grants. I think the only other thing that I want to point out is just as we in Massachusetts use, like I mentioned, right, like a lot of these funds are weighted heavily toward those districts and schools that have large numbers or proportions of low income students. The way we in Massachusetts define low income is based on 100%, or sorry, 185% of the poverty level, the 185% of the federal poverty level. So we're capturing a lot more students. So um, our reports will show your districts, maybe 30%, 40%. I believe the state average is right around 50% low income students. The federal government has to have its own way of calculating low income. They don't have as much information, right? Like we do it on a student by student basis. And as Rob said, like we don't give US Ed student by student information, right? We don't give US Ed any income data on individual students. So US Ed, if they're splitting up their pie of money to all 50 states plus 6 territories, they have to have a way of doing this. And the way they do it is by census. So they're taking census numbers and they're applying that to 100% of the just the federal poverty level. They're not using 185 like we are. And so when they give out these federal dollars, there can sometimes be like oh my, like a sticker shock, almost like, oh my God, you say that we have 10% kids in poverty. We have like 40% of kids in poverty. And the federal government is like, well, our way of doing this is using a census. We're not using, individual level data. So it's yes, it's going to be different, and that can cause some confusion. But really, that's the only way the feds can do it without having, the data that Massachusetts has. And of course, Massachusetts, each state does their own low income metric maybe a little bit differently. And so in order to standardize this, when they're giving out their money, the feds have to use something, so they use their census figures. It's a bit lagged. It's like 3 years lagged, but that's how they do it. Um, I just thought it's important to point that out because that's often a confusion when we give out numbers from the feds, and the feds are, oftentimes the question is, wait a second, we have a lot more low income kids. The feds missed kids, and it's like, no, they're just using a different way of measuring it. So Rob,
Yeah.
is there anything else that you think I should have said in
No,
this?
if I could just, I want to, there's two
Yes.
other things I wanted to cover. If I could tee you up, do you have something that talks about exactly how much money we're talking about here in terms of the federal dollars?
To Massachusetts?
Yes.
Yeah, give me 1 second
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that.
So, well, I'll tee you up for that for a second. There are two things I want to mention that that we haven't gotten to. One sort of I touched on a little bit. The first is another use of the federal dollars is with the federal dollars that come along, we get to take administrative funds from those. Okay, so in terms of how important is the USED? Well, in terms of DESE, the USED is very important. Those federal dollars are very important. Without getting to an actual percentage, I can tell you that we are majority federally funded from a staffing perspective at the department. So that's a certainly an important use for us. And then in terms of the you know, is what happens if the USED disappears question, right? Might as well sort of cut that one off and try to, here's my take on it, and this is not speaking necessarily for the commissioner or anybody else, but here's my take on it from having worked with the USED for over 20 years. The USED does a lot. The USED is required to do a lot. My take on it is that when people start to get into what actually would still need to be done to follow the laws if the USED goes away, I think they're going to find that it's actually a lot of work to make USED go away and still follow the laws, right? That doesn't mean that it couldn't be restructured. It couldn't mean change the way they operate. But in terms of the elimination of the USED, it could happen. I just want you to, I think what we're trying to get across to you today is the USC does a lot, and that's required of them to do by law. And that would still need to be taken up somehow. And if anything, if nothing else, it would take time to be able to figure out how that's all going to work. Instead of just, eliminating the agency itself.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, right? Like the way I think about it is like, if Desi got eliminated, right? Like there might be people out there who jump for joy, but then there's like, okay, well then who's gonna license our teachers? Who's gonna give us our money? Like the processes still sort of have to happen for the system to work. So I think it's very similar, right? Like, yeah, Rob, you're right. Like wherever it lives, like a lot of this stuff needs to continue to happen, and it's probably going to be, they've built up an infrastructure there since 1980, where USED became a cabinet level office, but USED has been in existence for like over 100 years,
Years, right?
in various iterations. It's been a cabinet level office for 45 years now. And yeah, their role is expanded. They do a lot of, as I mentioned, all those the audits and the civil rights and the special education, private school. There's a bunch of stuff with private schools because they get, equitable services for IDEA and ESSA. So like, there are a lot of different offices now in USED, and it would be very challenging to just say you don't exist anymore.
Yeah. Did I give you enough time to tee up what kind of dollars we're talking about here for those that might not know?
You did. So I'm going to share two things. One is not fully up to date, and I apologize for that, but this is short notice.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, no, but just to
so,
give everybody an idea.
so this gives you a sense of the ESSA funds. So what you're looking at is FY19 to the last full year that I have on this screen is FY24. Um, and this is ESSA grants. So this is Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV. And you can see like the black numbers indicate we got more money the next year, and the red figures indicate that we got less money the next year. And that there's good reasons for that, right? Like just as districts in Massachusetts fluctuate in their poverty levels, so too do the states. And the feds, if Massachusetts went down in poverty from one year to the next, we might get less money because they only have so much of the pot for themselves. You can also see how certain
Or Matt, can I just say, or if
yeah,
if other states go up more than we do,
that's right. That's
right?
right. That's right. It's all relative, right?
Yeah,
It's really the share. It's the proportion of low income students that we have among all states and territories. So, you
yeah.
can see some healthy increases in Title One really over the years, over the pandemic years even. You see a different story in Title Two. 35 million back in 2019, all the way down to 30 million. Title 2A seems to be one of these programs this is for teachers, professional development, et cetera, that seems to be politically out of favor. for whatever reason. Title III, that's for English learners, that's gone up every single year. And Title IV has gone up pretty considerably over the last few years. We had a couple down years, but that continues to grow. Um, so ESSA total is like 360 million-ish. IDEA is around there as well, a little bit more, I think. So that's sort of the long-term view.
Yeah.
I will also share this thing. Rob, did you want to pipe in there
Well, I
one
was going to
sec?
say, as you can see, you quickly approach close to $1 billion. You know,
Yes. Yeah, it's close to $1 billion.
in terms of
Not
federal money.
including ESSER, which was
Right.
like billion. But yeah, you approach that much money. Um, and I also just wanted to share, I know we got we want to leave some time for questions, right?
Questions, yeah. Mhm.
Um, just wanted to share this, just to, I go back to the appropriations process. And what typically happens is that, the president asks for money and puts out their budget, and then the president's budget goes to Congress, and Congress rips it up, and Congress does their own thing and says, "Here's what the appropriations are." So I mentioned that we don't have funding now for FY26. We don't know what those levels are, but I just want to show you some of the stances and the politics behind this, because like President Biden, this was his budget request. It says FY25, but this is actually to forward fund FY26. He wanted increases in Title I, Title II, Title II again. See, that was a hold steady, more for Title III, hold steady in Title IV. It went to the House. The House said, "Here's what we want." Now the House is a little bit more partisan. Um, Title I, they wanted to cut by 20%. They wanted to totally eliminate Title II and totally eliminate Title III, and give a little bit more for Title IV, and just a tiny bit more for IDEA. The Senate then puts together their own bill. So the Senate, which is less partisan, more we have to compromise. Um, Title I, they wanted some increases. This is more along the lines of the president's budget. And that's where we are. Like those two sides then typically get together and go to like joint committee and figure out, okay, here's what we do, and here's what the president is going to sign. This is what I'm talking about. That part hasn't happened for FY26. So we're still in limbo with these proposals on the floor, but I imagine that a new Congress is going to uh, change this up a little bit. So I thought that was some important context there.
Yeah.
There was a couple Q&A things like, do you think there's a risk of this new administration using federal education dollars to push different policies? Yes, I think that there is a risk. I don't want to, but like we are going to keep our eyes peeled, our ears to the ground. These things usually come in by executive order or through grants. So we will obviously be on the lookout for any executive orders that come from the president's office. Some things you can make executive orders on, some things you can't. So there will be some, whenever these come out, there will be some parsing of that. There will also be, when we get the award documentation from USED, we will go through that with a fine-tooth comb to see what, if anything, new is in those grant award documents, so that we know, if any additional stipulations were put in there, and then we'll respond, appropriately. So, but there is, we're definitely, on the lookout for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What
I
about
would just
2A?
say, Matt,
Go
I would
ahead.
just add, you know, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that it's a little bit of a heightened, we're all a little, have a little bit more of our antennas are up more than ever, right? And I think that's fair to say. I would just say two things. One, we don't have any indication right now, so I just want to be really clear about some of the, the specific policies that you might be discussing. We don't have any indication of that, but we are certainly cognizant of the risk. And as Matt said, making sure that we're attuned to it. The other thing is, I would say, well, again, while it may be, we might be at a heightened risk right now. I will say that, like with any change in administration, right, there's change in policies and change in priorities, whether you like them or you don't like them or what have you, right? So we are bracing ourselves not only for what might be a little bit of a heightened risk, but also just in general, right? There'll be changes in policies that come along with a general change in administration, and we'll just be ready to act in the what we think is the best interest of kids as those policies may or may not change. Oh, what about 2A makes it potentially less likable, Matt? It's an interesting question, using your word as likable. Could it perhaps be, you know, the other ones are the other titles are more explicitly student focused, as opposed to 2A?
Yeah, I think it somewhat has to do with that it's focused on teachers and professional development. And what we see actually a lot is that a lot of some Title 2A dollars are not actually spent on professional development. They're sort of an emergency release valve for, getting more staffing. And so there's some, I think that there are some folks in Congress who don't want to be using ed dollars just specifically for, like, this is the fund for staffing. Like, I think that there's probably, like, the thought is districts and states have to staff their schools with their funding. And again, anything that USED gives out should be supplemental. For like a interventionist or any kind of teacher who's helping to supplement programs, you can use Title One for that, right? Like for students who have more needs, extra needs. IDEA, you can fund special education teachers with IDEA. So I think that's it's like, well, if we're allowing Title One to go to staffing and and IDEA to go to staffing in those specialized areas, like, why are we using Title 2A to, for really any teacher? Those are not my words. That's just like I think trying to describe the atmosphere in in USED Washington terms.
So, Matt, could you just clarify one thing in terms of the continuing resolution that goes through March 14th?
Yeah.
What they then are deliberating is funding that actually will be next school year. Is that right?
Yep, they'll be
Okay.
deliberating FY26. So none of your FY25, like this school year, none of those funds are at risk. Like that, those dollars were appropriated last year. You've got them. They're obligated, and yeah, they're considered gone.
And this isn't US DOE, but Matt, can you maybe say a word or two about free lunch, school nutrition?
I well, I don't know
I
a
know
ton.
that's also it's not really fair.
That's
If nothing else, can you at least clarify for people? Because I think that people are under the impression that maybe the state is fully funding lunch now, and that isn't actually the case.
right. So it's from what I know of school lunch, it is really sort of a joint sort of matching venture between the federal government and the state. So the federal government and it's really USDA. It's not USED. So it's USDA gives out money to states for the lunch program, and then states have to match. And I think part of that match, and again, Rob Leshin, don't shoot me, is that we would, fund more than just the match so that all kids could get free lunch. I think that's how it works. Rob,
But well, I was going to say
is
the
that
big
is
thing
that
is that it's
your?
It's not
understanding?
a, no, yeah, I think you're right. It's not the U.S. Department of Agriculture is a leading agency in it, right? So it's not, for the, it is not necessarily all tied up in what happens with the USED as it relates to federal dollars related to school lunch. I guess is the best way I can put it. Tracy,
Open
I
it.
don't know if there's other things you wanted to.
I mean, I think you all touched on, I think in answering Sarah's question, I think the one that's probably most active in people's minds right now, which is what if there's an effort by the federal government to start tying new things into the federal granting system?
Yeah,
And I mean, I guess the only question I would have is that I assume at some point, if language like that comes through, it probably gets kicked up various ladders to see if somebody is
yeah,
going to try to do something.
yeah.
Yeah,
We'd have to react, and I think we would react accordingly. In relation to the specific policies in the question that was asked, I want to reiterate really clearly. We do not collect information from school districts about documentation status. We do not collect information from school districts about sexual orientation. So not that we share anything anyway, personally identifiable, but we don't even have that information if it was asked of us from the U.S. Department of Education.
The one that comes to mind though is that you do collect gender identity.
We collect gender in three choices. Yes,
Okay.
male, female, and non-binary. That's correct.
Okay. And then Judy wants to know what school committee should be doing to help in any way if possible. Judy, do you mean in terms of getting the budget passed or what?
I think it's
well,
advocacy is probably like continue to advocate with your elected officials on what is needed at the federal level is probably the best advice you can give.
yeah, yeah, and also, our federal grants office is fairly plugged into everything federal grants. Obviously, it would be bad if we weren't. But like, please, I think at the beginning of this new presidency, there's going to be a lot of things coming at us. We'll hear a lot of things. If you guys hear stuff, you know, please ask us because sometimes, what you've heard is actually a real thing, and sometimes it's just something that the president said. Like it's gonna. So we've got a system internally and also with the governor's office where things come in, we'll escalate and we'll determine like the appropriate response. Sometimes and we'll just have to see, but like don't be reticent. Please, if you hear something, let us know, uh, and so that we can help.
And also, I think something that was particularly important that Rob mentioned earlier is that it isn't as easy as some of the sort of headlines we've seen may make it sound.
Okay.
No, yeah, absolutely.
I think Matt's speaking for many of us in saying that this has been reassuring. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah. Happy to help. And again, if questions for Matt and if anything, Tracy knows how to get in touch with us. I know we're right up against time, so I think I speak for Matt when I say I appreciate you guys having us. And happy to help.
Great. Thank you very much. Happy New Year all, and don't forget January 31st. Have a good weekend.